What's going on, boys and girls? Welcome back to another solo leveling Arise video. Alright, boys, and my 3% of females who watch me, we got ourselves a video that many of you have been asking about since Kaisel did drop. What shadows should you be focusing on? So I'm going to do a full breakdown, and we're going to do this a little bit differently, okay? I'm going to talk about the shadows you should focus on and where they should be placed in your team. Whether this should be the Shadow Authority, aka the person that gives you the passive, or the shadow that gives you the passive, or should they be part of slot 1 or 2 who essentially just lets you do some of their moves, okay? I'm going to be real with you guys right now, from the get-go, from the start, alright? There are 3, or let's say there's 4 shadows that really fit the mold of Shadow Authority. Okay, and you guys need to understand that, and it's all going to be dependent on who you use and what content you're using it for. All right, so let's talk a little bit about that. Let's go ahead and jump into let's do a team. Actually, we'll put a little team together, and you guys can kind of see from there. So manage teams, and we'll go over to the formation here. We'll just call it formation 4. Okay, so here is how I put together my teams and how my shadows relate to that team. Okay, so let's start off with simply this. You're doing POD, it's win day, and your main unit is going to be Mireille. Okay, so Mireille is your main unit. Now, if you know anything about Mireille, most of her damage doesn't come from her ultimate. As a matter of fact, most of her damage comes from her 2 skills. So Wings of Night and the Raven's Cry. These are the 2 skills that she does the most amount of damage. These are the basic skills, right? So if you go into her skill sheet, these 2 skills here is her bread and butter, because when she becomes she goes into her Bunkai, right, the Moonless Night Overture, these moves also get amplified. So everything that she does with these 2 moves are going to make a big difference in damage. So let's just say Mireille is going to be your main damage dealer. Your main shadow's job is to support SJW and your damage dealers, to put out as much possible damage out there as they possibly can, right? So let's use her as a prime example, okay? And then let's just put together another team. Let's put together the full team. Let's just say I want to do a full win team, right? Because I want her to take advantage of her A4, which gives 30% more win damage. So let's just say I did this. So here's how you would create this team. So we know 2 things about Mireille. Number 1, she's a massive DPS, and number 2, she has insane crit rate and crit damage. So first thing you want to do is take Igris out of the Shadow Authority. You do not need this extra 7%. She already has an abundance of damage. Wu doesn't really need that much crit, and Hansini definitely doesn't need crit, right? So we're going to take those guys out completely. All right. Not to mention, Wu also does his basic skills quite often. He can do one of his basic skills 3 times, and the other one can be refreshed by doing that same skill 3 times over and over again. Okay. So it's very important to remember that their core damage is also not a big deal in this one. So Tusk is out. So the 4 major, let's just say 4 major units you want to use a Shadow Authority realistically as any type of player would be Tusk for core attack, because it's 35%, Igris for crit rate, Big Rock for basic skill damage, and then at this point Kaisel for the ultimate damage. Now some of you may want to use the 7% crit hit damage, but in my opinion crit damage is already so high you don't really need but you can. So technically you can do 5 Shadow Authorities that really make sense. The rest of them don't really matter that much, right? Okay, so in this case, because we know Mireille, and I've just told you guys, her basic skills is what matters the most, Big Rock would come into play. So the entire team members' basic skill damage by 10%. So Big Rock would be your Shadow Authority in this case. So what the Shadow Authority essentially is, you see a little crown, it allows you to get their passives as part of your skills. Now, obviously they have other skills as well too in here, but ideally the 2 best in-slot options for boss fights are always going to be Iron, specifically because he does defense down by 12%, especially when you're using a full hunter team, right? So let's just put this together here. Big Rock here, Iron here, and then lastly, and this is a 100% must, you should never ever not have Serbi on your team. Serbi should always be on the team, and the reason why Serbi should need to be on the team is specifically for this basic attack that it does. Deals damage equal to 50% of the user's attack. Irrelevant here. What matters is this: increases damage taken by 5%, and the duration is infinite. So you pretty much have an infinite 5% damage increase on the opponent right from the get-go. So these 2 are the main holders, period. Now, for any boss fights. Now, if you have a defense shredder already, Iron is the one that you can remove. Now, when do you ever use blades, and when do you ever use Tank? So let's talk about Tank. Tank has one good thing about himself, and that is a stun. So in case you're fighting a boss that, let's just say, has a long-winded move and you need to stun it, summoning tank could be a good reprieve from stunning, because when you stun a boss, that move is no longer cast. That move is now out of the rotation and it goes to the back end of that boss's moveset, right? So you can actually stop quite a bit with tank. Now, that's a very seldom use. The other one is Blades. Blades has an amazing AoE where if you use it in a battlefield of time specifically, it can kill almost every ad for you fairly quickly. So those are the two main reasons you ever want to use this: AoE, BOT, and any form of stun. But ideally, these two will always be your main two go-tos. Now, if you have another defense shred, another good one here now will actually be Kaisel. And also, I should have mentioned this, Blades also has a bleed. So technically you can put Blades in if the opponent can be bled. If not, useless. But here's the thing with Kaisel, okay? You can also have a Shadow Authority, or you can have them sit as a basic. The reason why basic is not bad is you can see the percentage of damage is very, very high for Kaisel. Kaisel does insane. Look at 825% here, 782% here, and then 662%, 65% increasing your speed, right? If you compare those percentages to someone like Igris, you can see it's almost half of the damage. So because he does so much damage as an ad or as a shadow, he's actually one of the most ideal units to have here if you're looking just for raw DPS. And believe it or not, if you can summon your shadow a few times through the fight and you have the Blessing Stone that increases your shadow's attack by 100%, he is doing a lot of damage for you. So Kaisel is actually a really good choice to be here. So this is an example that I would use for any fight with Mirai. Okay, so there you guys go. So this would be Mirai's setup. So if I did a Hunter team, for example, so Mirai would be that team right there. Okay, so I go to formation. Let's go back down here. Let's go here, right? So it'd be like this. It'd be Mirai, where's she? Mirai, Wu, and Hansimi. Hands in my pants. All right, and then so the Shadow Authority would be Big Rock, because obviously the basic attack is huge for her. That's again her main source of damage. And then Combustion for extra 5%, and then defense down when I need it. Nobody here does defense shred, right? So that would be her team. Obviously, Azure Remnant in here, okay? Now, let's just say I want to do Alicia, right? Let's do an Alicia team now instead. So we all know Alicia, or we should know that Alicia's most dominant DPS is going to be her core attacks, right? So let's build a full water team. And not only that, but Mei Lin also boosts core attack with her skill. So what would be your Shadow Authority here, right? It would be Tusk, because Tusk gives an extra 35% core attack. So again, these two will remain the same. Tusk will step in, and now your main DPS is getting the bonus of 35% more core attack. So this would be your water team Shadow Authority. All right, now let's do somebody else. Let's pick someone like Cha. Okay, we'll put a light team in place. So we know that Cha is mostly using attack and crit damage and damage increase, right? So those are going to be her main ones, but she also does do quite a bit of damage with her basic skill. So you have a couple options here to avoid not critting, because obviously it plays such a big role in her ultimate, etc. Igris would be smart. That's 7% above the 50% that she already has, and then I will put you above the 50% mark, letting you crit more. He's a no-brainer, pretty much for almost every unit but Choi. Let's just say you want to do more on your ultimates, because if you have an A5 ultimate for her ultimate's already boosted by 5%, or 50%. Now you're adding an extra 7% to that. So now your ultimates are doing more damage. So Kaisel is obviously a no-brainer there as well. And then lastly, because you do build quite a bit using your Waltz and your second skill, Sword of Light, the basic skills is a no-brainer as well. So she's a very versatile unit. The only one you really don't care about here is Tusk, right? So any of those would work depending on your stats and your skills. So let's move over and use somebody else. Let's use Charlotte. Yeah, let's do a dark team. Let's say I want to do this team here, all right? So Charlotte, we know basic attacks matter the most. Her ultimate is where all of her damage comes from. SM Beck, on the other hand, though, does a ton of damage with his core attack and also does have bleed. So here, if you're going to use Charlotte as your main DPS, Kaiselian makes the most amount of sense, because Kaisel will give an extra bonus damage every 20 seconds. She'll get that extra 7% and be able to cast her ultimate as much as she wants. Let's just say you want to use SM Beck as your main DPS. Well, Tusk is great for this because he also does basic core attack, and SM Beck's core attack is a key part of his element and DPS. Or if you want to just do it again, you go back to the entire team getting the basic skill. So overall, guys, it depends on how you want to do this. These two, again, are going to always be your mainstay. Unless you have a defense shredder, then you can remove him, put him in. Unless you're doing BOT, put him in. Unless you are needing a stun, put him in, right? But here, ideally, it goes most used, second most used. We'll say hand in hand, 1 and 1, depending on your circumstances and your crit. And then I'd say this and then this. And then once in a while, you can put Serbi in the front here as well too. Let's just say you do decide to put Serbi here in the front instead. So who would you replace here? Well, that's simple. You'd go with Tusk or Iron, sorry. And then I would personally, I would put in Kaisel for the extra damage. Just because look at that damage difference, man. It's crazy the amount of damage he does. Like look at the comparison, 382, right? 353. You look at any of them, they're doing nowhere near as much. So Kaisel is just smart to have just for the raw damage. So this team is very viable as well, but the crit damage bonus is not that much. And quite honestly, I mean, it does apply to everything. You also need to crit for it to matter. So when you're fighting things in your red combat power, this is something you probably won't use. So there you guys go. I hope this helped kind of give you an idea of how I run my shadows, and it's always based on the team I plan to use. Hope this kind of gives you guys some perspective on how to do things yourself and helps you out and understand. So is Kaisel an OP shadow? I'll be honest, it won't be the most used shadow, but it is definitely the strongest shadow out of all of them from raw damage perspective. But I'd say Big Rock, Igris, and Tusk, probably the main shadow authorities, and Serbi will never be replaced. Serbi will always be there for combustion. You should always use Serbi for combustion. This is a no questions asked scenario. And then if you have a defense shredder, Iron doesn't need to be used, but Iron is pretty much good for everything else if there is no defense shredder, and Kaisel is mostly for damage. And if you use specifically units like Charlotte or Cha, who just do a shitload of damage with their ultimates, and you want to boost the ultimate further. Unfortunately, 8% doesn't sound like a lot, but it can stack. Remember, if you go to WOBL, for example, and you get yourself a crap load of blessings for ultimates and you want to just boost that even further, well, add an extra 8% to it. It does matter at the end. It will show a little bit of an impact at least to getting some of the content done. All right, guys, this is Payne. Thank you so much for watching again. I'll see you guys in the next video. Take care.